so I'm thrilled to have him here to give our talk to our lab. I've already learned a lot from him on just in all the meetings we've had in the last several hours, and I'm sure all of us are going to learn a lot from his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Nash, and I've enjoyed since our dinner last night and this morning that I met quite a few of you. Let me just jump directly into this presentation. I've been working on this paper for quite some time, and I'm hoping this summer finally it'll see some light. It's a paper starting with this gentleman. Do you guys know who this is?
No, this is...
Granovetter?
yes.
Yes, it's Mark Granovetter.
Yeah.
And what is he known for?
Strength of weak
Weak
ties.
ties.
Strength of weak ties. And what's his key argument that he makes? Hold on, let me just do one small thing.
If we have weak tie, we have more opportunity for finding a job.
Okay. And so one of his key dissertation ideas that he focused on was the idea that individuals span across social enclaves, and these ties typically tend to be weak, right? And the argument that he typically makes is that of an informational argument, that you're able to, by spanning across these social enclaves, you get, information is sort of concentrated in these pockets, and these weak ties allow the flow of this unique information across these enclaves, okay? So the weak tie mechanism, for those of you who live in the worlds of zeros and ones, is really an informational argument, that you're able to access unique bits of information through these distant ties. 1973 dissertation comes out, is a classic. I don't know, last time I checked he has 27,000 sites in Google Scholar. I keep hearing rumors that he's being nominated for the Nobel Prize, but I don't know how far my sources are correct. But then the alternative view comes from this gentleman here. Do you guys know who this is?
Is that Granovetter?
Yeah, that is Krakauer. All right, good, Eric. Who turns out that he developed a different view of tie, the tie theory, and he said that strong ties actually bind you. And his argument was that through strong ties, you actually develop a degree of trust. And so you have one end, the weak tie hypothesis saying you get all these information benefits, and then on the other end you have the strong tie hypothesis, which basically argues that you communicate with these people very frequently, there's a high degree of reciprocity, and in the process you make yourself vulnerable to your alters. And by alters we mean, people who are in your networks. You guys are used to the term ego and alter, right? I hope I can make that connection. And so his argument is through strong ties you get trust, and through that trust you are able to do things, take a lot of risks, and therefore facilitate your career success. So you have two alternative views of tie strength. Granovetter's view is you span across these social enclaves, you have these infrequent communication, you get access to these unique bits of information, and you use those unique bits of information to get ahead. Krackhart and Rob, Cross, and Levin, their argument is you interact with people very frequently, you get fine-grained information, people trust you, and in the process of trusting you, you are able to take an extra step, and that facilitates your career success. So two very different views of tie strength, and so that is a basic goal of my presentation today. What are the mechanisms that tie strengths lead to career success? So I'm looking at the mediators of network tie, and you have career success. So what's the black box in between? Because you have two competing explanations. You have the information access, and then you have the trust mechanism. And surprisingly,
Is everything okay?
We have to fix the recording since it's a recording.
this screen. Oh. All right. You want me to go back?
Sure.
All right. Fair enough. I will go part. No, that didn't help either. Let's just do this. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Not a problem. Just want to make sure.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit blind here, but I won't know what's coming up next.
But you can see. Oh, you can't see. Oh, I see.
That's fine. That's fine. They should be mine, so I should know what it's about. Now it turns out that since 1977, when Granovetter's papers came out, it triggered a huge body of empirical research. Hundreds of studies. We searched for all these hundreds of studies. What we found was 140 studies. We could actually summarize them in our meta-analysis. Now, one of the things I've realized in the process was meta-analysis is a statistical technique that really was developed in educational psychology. And around 15 years ago, the American Psychological Association made it mandatory for all publications in the APA umbrella to include their correlation tables. The American Psychological Association does not have an equivalent version of it. So the net result is you will see a lot of sociology.
You mean ASA doesn't?
Yeah,
ASA
or
does.
whichever, AJS, ASR, they don't include correlation tables, which means I can't meta-analyze them. So there is, an issue here that we found 140 studies we could include in our meta-analysis that use tie strength, which use some type of career success, and we could include them, but only 15 to 20 of them actually are from sociology journals. So as I'm sort of going to sort of flush out to you the theory and the methods behind it, realize that maybe there is a clear-cut limitation in my study, and that is a problem with meta-analysis. It's as good or as bad as the primary studies that we analyze. And one of the limitations is that many of the sociology journals don't report correlation tables. We tried our best. We, in fact, emailed quite a few authors. Give us the primary data. We'll run the analysis. But this is the best we could get. But given that we have 140 studies, it's a reasonably large-size meta-analysis. We thought, the findings are reasonably robust. So here is what Granovetter originally talked about. By the way, please stop me at any time during this process. I do realize, I've gone, as qualitative researchers would say, I've gone native. I've been so close to this data that I may be talking in my own language. So remind me to step back and explain things to you. So these were the 4 dimensions that actually Granovetter talks about when he mentions the dimensions of tie strength, communication frequency, how long you have known a person, how much emotional exchange there is, and the final one is reciprocity. So 2 potential mechanisms. One is strong ties that facilitate trust. You're interacting with people. You make yourself vulnerable in the process. That's one aspect. Information primarily was argument of weak ties, that you're able to go across social enclaves, get access to information. But recently, 1999, Hansen made an argument, and this was at the team level. Do you guys remember the paper by Martin Hansen? So he proposed a contingency theory of strength of weak ties, and his argument was that weak ties are good at identifying unique bits of information, but to transfer that unique bit of information, to make it actionable inside your team, you really need strong ties. And therefore, he provided a slightly more complex view, but for the purpose till I show you my results, I just want you to think of this dichotomy. Weak ties focus on information, strong ties focus on trust, okay? And so this is the basic model that we have proposed. So the main mechanisms by which ties have an effect on career success is if people, if you interact with people frequently, you begin to trust them, they begin to trust you, and that gives you the competitive edge in the marketplace, and that's why you succeed. When you have strong ties with people, they are willing to share with you the most intimate secrets. There's a job that's coming out there, and there's going to be a stock market, some changes, somebody's going to get fired, some bits of information, some temporally stamped bits of information. And that helps you get ahead. We also know that when you're surrounded by friends, you like going to the workplace, you're more satisfied with your job, you remain more committed to your organization, and that leads to greater organizational commitment and career success. So these are the 3 mechanisms by which ties have an effect on career success. Any questions so far?
You haven't put signs on it yet.
No, not yet. But they all are positive for now. Okay? And by tie strength, I'm meaning going from weak to strong.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, as I develop this model, it's sort of a generic model. It doesn't take into account the boundary conditions. And for a long time, we have different studies have actually argued that there are, strong. The weak tie hypothesis is not a clear-cut silver bullet. It doesn't work in all contexts. So, for example, in our studies, I haven't updated these results. 8 months ago, we had 100 studies. When we looked at those 100 studies, 68 actually didn't support the weak tie hypothesis, meaning they found support for strong ties. And in fact, we found only 1/4 approximately supporting the weak tie hypothesis. Now, this was when we had around 90 to 100 studies. We have now added 40 more studies, so the data the data now touches around 140 studies that we have analyzed.
I'm sorry, I think I missed this. You're matching, or you're picking the studies based on the fact that they say they're studying weak ties, or you're picking them based on the dependent variables that they're purporting to measure?
We go in first to see whether they measure weak ties.
Okay.
And then we see if there's any variable in that we can categorize either as trust, information effectiveness, job attitude, or career success.
Okay.
So the key IV here is tie strength.
Okay.
Okay. And sometimes you might, I don't think we face that big of a problem, but when we analyzed some of the prior studies, they didn't have correlations, but they gave like p-values, and then we'd extract the effect size from that. So this is basically telling you that some studies are finding support for weak tie hypothesis, some are not, that maybe there are contingency factors. And people have already identified the first set of contingency factors. First is culture. I don't know, maybe Granovetter had quite a few students from Korea or China. So the first, I think Bayan was one of them who sort of studied networks in Japan. And he sort of looked at the role of tie strength in Japan, China. And so it's sort of, they didn't find support for it. In some places they found more support for strong ties. One of the changes that happened in the 1990s and in more recent times, when management researchers began to use the strength of weak tie theory, they started looking at intra-organizational networks and tie strength inside the organization and its consequences. So more like an internal labor market. Whereas Granovetter's study was in Boston, it used a labor recruitment agency, so it was an external labor market. So maybe the results we are seeing is a difference because some people are studying tie strength inside organizations and some people are studying tie strength outside. Okay? One of the things that the strength of weak ties theory has been criticized for is that maybe it's not applicable to all employees. It's not applicable to all individuals. So for example, we know that weak ties span across social strata. So here I'm the low end of the socioeconomic status. I have weak ties, and typically many of my weak ties are to people higher up in status. And the people who are higher up, maybe they are not getting their benefits from the weak ties, but they're getting it primarily from their strong ties to the people who are their peers. And so you may find that the socioeconomic status of the employees or the individuals will determine what type of ties matter more. So I'm sitting up there on the totem pole. I'm not going to use my weak ties with people at the low end. I will just use my strong ties. So people higher up will use more of their strong ties, whereas people low up, because the only way they can access resources is through their weak ties. So maybe the status of the actors will determine what type of networks they would use. Okay? Is that a superdose? Making sense? Okay. So these are some of the potential moderators or boundary conditions which sort of tell us when weak tie theory can be used and when the strong tie theory can be used. Okay? So let's just jump in with more specifically the type of culture. And Michelle Gelfand came up with a concept called tight and loose cultures. I think it was in Science or Nature, where she basically said that, she and her 20-odd co-authors, basically said that you have two different types of cultures. One culture where people's norms are really strong, and individuals in that culture would be highly penalized if you deviated from that norm. So for example, that's one dimension where India and Pakistan actually are pretty close. Because Pakistan is a very tight culture, and the next country below it actually is India, where people get penalized very severely if you deviate from the norms. The other end, you have the loose culture where the norms are weak and there's a greater tolerance for deviance. And so one of the key ideas that we are having here is that in strong norms, the focus is on conformity. The focus is on being able to trust the information that you're getting, and therefore you'd expect that you'd be able to monitor this individual very strongly, and therefore you'd find that in tight cultures, really, the strong ties would deliver. Whereas in loose cultures, people are willing to accept diverse bits of information, they are willing to handle various complex issues, multiple uncertain scenarios, so there you would expect weak ties to be able to deliver the results. So what we are basically saying, and this is the part you'll have to sort of, when you do meta-analysis, it's slightly different, where your independent variable here is the correlation between tie strength and career success. That is your independent variable. Actually, that's your dependent variable, my bad. So let us say you're sitting in Pakistan, you have strong ties, and therefore you get promoted. If you had the same type of strong ties and you sat in America, where the tightness was significantly weaker, you would not get the same benefits. So two sets of individuals, same quantity of strong ties, but you change the tightness of the culture. In tight cultures where deviance is not at all allowed, strong ties will deliver, whereas in America, that will penalize you because you are not able to get unique bits of information. So that's why what we're saying here is, as you go from a culture that's, from this culture which is low on tightness, and you go to a culture that's high on tightness, the benefits of strong ties will go up. So the dependent variable is effect size. Effect size here is the association between strong ties and career success. Just think about it for a second. I know it's slightly different from the way we handle when we think about tie strength here. So this is like a moderator. So we're saying the culture is going to moderate whether strong ties are potent or not. And one dimension of culture is the tightness. Any questions? So we're going to have a surprise quiz right now after this, okay? So be ready for questions.
Are you measuring that like relative to other people in the network, just how much information they have, or is it a different measure? Measuring success.
So success is basically the extent to which they were promoted, whether they got a bonus, whether they got a job, things of that type.
Did you look at was there a way of looking at how much information those people who were promoted or not promoted had that directly motivated those promotions, or is that too fine-grained?
We do actually take into account the amount of information they have, because it's one of the mediators that we're going to propose, that we've proposed. And then you'll see what happens. Okay? Yeah.
Does this control for the organizational structure of the companies in different tight versus loose cultures, whereas tight culture might adhere to more traditional organizational methods?
No, we do not. So think about this when you look at Granovetter study, right? It's not a random sample, but it's people who span across industries.
Right.
But let's say if you look at more of the organizational level studies, organizational based studies, where you're looking at ties inside, like with the work of Rob, Cross, and Levin, yes, there we could control it. And I think we actually did control for it, but we didn't find anything for what it's called managerial discretion,
Right.
the amount of choices that individuals have at the top.
Okay.
So we didn't find an effect of that. Okay? And any questions? If you get the concept of effect size, then you'll be able to, this becomes relatively easy.
You used three countries as an example, India, Pakistan, and U.S., but this could apply to much smaller, like an organization, and I'm thinking the NCAA or a university or a company. some companies will have a tight culture, some will have a looser culture. Are you saying would the same effects be prevalent, or?
I can see your point.
Yeah.
The closest you can come to is the degree of uncertainty in the environment in which these organizations operate. But Michel Gelfand's scale on tightness and looseness is for like 56 countries.
I see.
So I'm using the three extremes to sort of give example that, especially if we can relate to it, so that we relate to it. But also my purpose is to sort of, she actually has a whole list of it, of all the different countries.
So much more at a macro level than.
Yeah. It's more cultural at the national level. Okay. And here is what Hofstede argued for in his original article. He's the guy who really highlighted the importance of culture in organizations. And he really says many of the theories that we develop in the West may not be applicable to other cultures. And so this is one of his quotes regarding that. And the one that we are focusing on is collectivism, which, the way I've set it up right now here is individualism goes from 0 to high, or you can frame it as collectivism and the effect size just goes up the opposite way. Making sense? And here what we are saying is, in collectivist societies like in China, strong ties will be able to get you more rents or more benefits than, let us say, in a more individualistic society like in the US. In the individualistic society, it's not strong ties, it's weak ties that will get you the rents. Whereas in collectivist societies, it's a strong ties that will give you what you want. And for example, it turns out that till 1990 in China, people were assigned which jobs they would get, which jobs they would work in. And so if, let's say, I knew of a job, I couldn't just come and tell Marlin that, hey, I have the job, Marlin, you want to take the job? Because if that news leaked out, then I would be penalized. So I would share this information about jobs with only people I trust. And so that's one of the reasons why you want, in the Chinese culture, really it is the strong ties that will give you the rents, and people just don't trust these unique bits of information that flow through weak ties. And so I'll show you the results about this. The other culture is power distance. Here again, in Korea, you would expect strong ties to deliver results, whereas in China, in America, or in Germany, where the power distance is low, weak ties would be able to deliver more of the results. Okay? And so the way this is set up is, as the power distance from one culture to the other, you jump from one culture to the other, the benefits of strong ties will go up. And here the anchor is strong ties. Okay? Having more strong ties will lead to greater outcomes. That's the way the effect size is set up. And so this actually, the next, is everybody on board so far?
Yeah.
So this is the part which really is a test of Granovetter's theory, because Granovetter focused on weak tie theory in the external labor markets. But then you had Coleman, you had Hansen, you had Rob Cross and Levin looking at tie strength inside organizations, and does the weak tie hypothesis work? If you're a manager, do you want to know whether there's a unique bit of information, or do you want information that is actionable, that somebody can deliver and then you can reciprocate the favor for? Or do you want to act on a random bit of information where you don't know the source? The answer to that is pretty obvious. In organizations, you want strong ties, because those are the ties that can help you act. And so our key hypothesis is that strong ties are more potent in internal labor markets inside the organization, whereas external labor markets, where you just having access to unique bits of information gives you a competitive edge. So that would be in the external labor markets, weak ties would matter more. And so this again is the idea of diverse information. And this is from Granovetter's paper, and the idea is reachability, and that's one of the reasons why weak ties give you access. Whereas in organizations, intra-organizations, reachability isn't as much an issue as much as trustworthiness as a way to handle things, mechanisms. This is my last moderator. Yeah.
Could you go back to the previous?
Sure.
So Effectiveness and tie strength. Okay.
In external labor markets.
Okay.
Okay. Whereas in internal labor markets, strong ties. Again, so this is the argument that some people have made about the limitation of Granovetter's research, that basically it works for low-end employees and for high-end managers, CEOs type of scenario. It's strong ties because that action is what will give you the results that you desire. So what we're proposing here is for managers, strong ties will give you more rents. For low-end employees, weak ties will give you more rents. So that's why, if weak ties give you more rents here. Oops.
Is effectiveness still
Yeah.
correlation, or is it is effectiveness the same as the correlation between? No.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Just to simplify it. But our key dependent variable is that FX size.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe the diagram threw you off. My
Yeah.
bad. I'll change
No,
that.
that's okay.
So we originally looked at all the different ways, or all the papers that looked at tie strength. Now this needs a little bit updating. I've been trying to get my doctoral student to respond to this, but we have now touched around 82 studies on average tie strength. There are actually 3 to 4 different ways that people have measured tie strength. One is some of them look at average. They give you a roster and they say, look at all these people, identify who are your contacts. On a scale of 1 to 5, tell me how frequently you communicate with them. And then they take the average. And then they say, okay, Ned, your average tie strength is 3.5 out of 5. Alternatively, they'll say, okay, Nosh, who did you get the job from? I said, okay, I got the job through Nosh. Now tell me, how is the quality of relationship between you and Nosh? So it's a more dyadic type of approach. This is how Granovetter originally measured his study. Okay. Marcus Baer, 2010 JP, he took a different route. And he said, I'll give you a list of all the employees. On a scale of 1 to 5, tell me how strongly you frequently communicate with these people. If you scored below 3, that counts as a weak tie. If you score above 3, that counts as a strong tie. So then you have, each person has like a portfolio of weak and strong ties. So all these different measures have been around. The good news, fortunately, is the type of measurement itself doesn't make much of difference in terms of finding significant results. It wasn't that strong. Okay. Nash?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here is the way we operationalized our dependent variable. Jobs, getting a job, pay increase, performance, trust. Actually, surprisingly, originally when we wrote this paper up, we didn't even include trust. But after reading Rob Cross's work, the different types of trust that people have, and the information effectiveness, here is what we're talking about, are temporally ephemeral bits of information. Unique information that has a clear-cut expiry date. That information will not be of value to you within 2-3 days. And it's very, very proximal in terms of time and social space. That's what we mean by informational effectiveness. It could even include creativity, coming up with ideas. And then the fourth way we looked at job attitudes was, the way how main industrial organization psychology literature looks at job satisfaction or commitment. So here is how typically a meta-analysis is done. You go through, you develop a coding sheet. You say, look, I'm interested in, these are my dependent variables, these are my moderators. You gather tons of data about the study itself, because that is where you develop your boundary conditions. Because what you're doing is you're looking at how one study is different from another. And you've got to look at the sample characteristics to make that. For example, it turns out that in one of my prior meta-analysis in the area of MIS, what we found was that the top 2 journals, when they published papers, the potency of IT was around 0.4. People have studied, does investment in IT lead to outcomes? There's a huge field area on that. But the top 2 journals, MISQ and ISR, would publish papers that found that investing in IT leads to outcomes. The low-end journals, the evidence became weaker and weaker. So the moderator here is actually the quality of the journal. So we didn't find that here, I'm fortunate to report, but we did find something else. All right, everybody on board so far? Anything you want me to repeat? I know meta-analysis is rare in the field of sociology, but it's picking up. Now there are at least 8 meta-analysis of networks that have been around in different forms. Yeah, on board. And then, so we looked at, the way networks were gathered, whether it was the typical way Granovetter developed it, or did they use some type of a ego network approach, or did they use like a dyadic approach? We even looked whether it was a whole network approach. So my doctoral student coded all these studies, 140 studies. I coded these 140 studies, and then we actually established the inter-rater reliability, and I think it sort of meets the muster, I guess. So here are the basic, some of the moderator results that we found. Okay, just to sort of say how robust these findings were. So, for example, if we followed the dyadic approach, the Granovetter approach, we found 30 studies on that, and then you had the individual approach, meaning we looked at all your tie strength and we averaged it. There was no difference in terms of effect size on these issues. We also looked at what if it was an independent, cross-sectional study versus longitudinal design. Again, we did not find a difference. This is to basically show that our findings are generalizable to the 140 studies that we have analyzed. Okay, and then we have a dichotomous measure, and we also have a scale-based measure, meaning on a scale of 1 to 5, or the dichotomous measure would be more like a Guanji approach. How is this person associated with you? Either they're family or they're not. And sometimes you could just get the average, specific alters, sometimes it's not specified. And then this for me was of interest because, Ron Burt has focused on ego network, some others have focused on whole network. From a tie strength perspective, it did not make a difference. Okay? So these were just robustness tests that we did. Now we'll move on to the actual result. Any questions about this? All right. So here is what we found about, so remember this was the original model that we had proposed, that tie strength leads to greater trust, and that then leads to career success. Now if weak tie hypothesis were to work, you would actually see a negative effect size. What we found was, first let's just see what the effect was. What's the connection between tie strength and career success? None. We did not find any direct effects. So all those studies just got wiped out. So which means either there are moderators or there are mediators. So let's take a look at the mediators first. So what we found was that when you go from weak ties to strong ties, the effect size is positive. So let's say Nosh has really strong ties, then people will trust him. And because they trust him, that will lead to his career success. I, on the other end, have only weak ties. People will not trust me, and therefore I will not succeed. So that is why this rho, which basically is corrected for unreliability and scale issues, is plus 0.26. If the weak tie hypothesis were to be supported, you would find this beta coefficient to be negative. Okay? Now remember, the next prediction was of informational effectiveness. This is not surprising.
Real quick, before you leave that upper chain there, and I'm sure this is me being naive and not knowing much about meta-analysis, but do we know that that's causal, or could it be that people don't trust you and so you have spent your time developing weak ties? People trust Nosh, so people want to spend more time. Like, do we know that it goes that direction and not the other direction?
Well, the only data point we have was when I showed you the cross-sectional versus longitudinal. We didn't find any differences in terms of the effect sizes.
Okay.
So we could actually make a stronger case here for the longitudinal part. Okay. But typically, the trust is also not whether Nosh trusts people, but it's whether people trust Nosh. So it's an in degree on that. Okay, but I can look at that one specific dimension too and see. Yeah.
Just very basic question. In meta-analysis, you correct for unreliability.
Correct.
For trust, like they seem like they're probably like self-report measures, and
Correct.
I can understand maybe you do like split half back. Is there a way to correct for unreliability in tie strength?
No, because typically we don't get reliability scores.
Single item.
Single item scores. Yeah, and the thing is, when you correct for reliability, it actually increases the effect size.
Absolutely.
So this is more a conservative test, especially in tie strength.
No, we have the same problem in social psychology, so I was just kind of wondering what.
Yeah, no, there's no way around that.
For
Right?
other single item measures.
Though, having said that, you can do like a test retest in terms of tie strength, but networks, people add and drop ties. So we don't know whether that tie retest difference is because people drop ties or because of the actual reliability.
Now, if the tie you're measuring is a non-directional tie, then you at least get 2 from each person who is giving you, but not for things like trust, which is definitely a directional tie.
Correct point.
So I have read a few papers that for like single item measures in meta-analyses, because of the correction for attenuation, you have an idea of what the minimum validity coefficient you can obtain with the measure, assuming a certain reliability, right? So like if you have like a reliability of 0.7, there is a certain maximum correlation you could obtain with that. If you have like, let's say, a certain maximum correlation you've obtained with the tie strength, you might be able to infer reliability of it just to give people a sense of, this tends to be the reliability of tie strength measures. It can't be any lower than this.
Okay. And I think there were some recent efforts at getting at reliability measures. I need to check on that.
I'm not familiar with it, yeah.
All right, so now remember the next hypothesis is where Granovetter's argument really comes into play. And the idea that, see this part here, you'd expect strong ties leading to trust, leading to career success. Here, what you would expect is that weaker ties would lead to greater informational effectiveness, so you'd expect a negative symbol here, and then that informational effectiveness, access to quick information, is what will give you career success. Okay? So
informational effectiveness is, I think, the question you were asking about earlier. Yeah.
So here again, let's go back to Nosh and me. So Nosh has all these strong ties. I have all these weak ties. His group is talking to itself. My ties are all spread out. I'm getting access to these unique bits of information. I know I'll act on them very quickly, whereas that information may never reach him. And therefore, I will succeed. So you should actually see a negative effect size between tie strength and informational effectiveness. Okay? And here's what we found. We again found a positive effect size. Meaning, again, Nosh is beating me because of his strong ties. And one possible reason I will talk about after this. And that informational effectiveness then leads to career success. Now, we already know that Nosh is, because he's surrounded by friends, he's surrounded in a clique, he's going to be happy, he's going to be more committed to his job, and that will give him the career success. We already know that. But this is the one part which sort of was surprising. I was hoping it would be otherwise. Now, but any reactions to this?
It sounds like information is useless without trust, is what I'm getting.
So we actually modeled for that also. We controlled for the trust when we modeled for it, but still it has an independent variable on that.
So it's not that people with weak ties are getting information and not using it. It's, maybe someone with trust is getting information, less than the information, but doing more with it.
I can't. What I can say from this is that not people with strong ties get trusted more, and therefore they get ahead. Not only that, people with strong ties, when compared to those with weak ties, get access to information that may not be unique, but it's more actionable, and that is what is leading them to their career success. So, when Granovetter developed his idea, that idea of unique information, very rarely is that mechanism that tested. And so this test is basically telling you that maybe Rob Cross, maybe Crackhart were right that strong ties do give you informational benefits. It's not just a question of trust. Okay. Now here is the strange finding we got, and partly I'm hoping you guys can help me out interpret this. So remember, we modeled this, right? We modeled this. It turned out to be fine, but then we also modeled for a direct pathway between tie strength. So basically, we are saying this is a partial mediation. And what this is telling you is that people like Nosh, who have strong ties, versus me, who have weak ties, actually I end up experiencing greater career effectiveness directly through my weak ties. And it's not due to information access. So there is a different mechanism that we have not sort of theorized yet as to why weak ties give you that edge. And it is significant. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so now we did this, we actually controlled for, I'll show you later analysis, we controlled for brokerage also. Even after controlling for brokerage, this relationship still remained significant.
Did this have something to do maybe with, I mean, obviously it would be something that isn't necessarily measured here, but my immediate reaction is maybe it's just the personality types that go along with having weak or strong ties. That people that tend to seek out stronger ties, perhaps they're those that are more comfortable in stability or that are more set in their ways, and they're people that may not be as ambitious or climb the ladder or just have the personalities that allow them to be more successful in their career. And that doesn't seem to be incorporated in any of these metrics. These all seem to be very objective measures of the resources they have, but I don't see anything that measures anything about the individual person.
Okay, so let's go to the moderators there then, because we do look at them, at least their the level at which they operate. Maybe not their personality. In fact, there are very few papers that actually look at personality and tie strength, if I remember correctly. There are very few. Okay, but that would be
Your co-author would be the one to have written it.
That's right. No, but he doesn't dabble in tie strength.
That's fine.
He's a personality.
Personality.
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing is, as
Just
I
came out with one, right? Was
Yeah.
it last 2 weeks ago?
the interesting thing when I did this meta-analysis, I sort of realized was, boy, we network researchers are so much in our own silos. For a long time, the strength of weak tie folks didn't talk to the ones in the structural approach. And I think the beauty of being in a business school is actually you're able to toggle both the worlds. And you're seeing more and more papers like in management science, org science, which are able to mix both the approaches. Yeah.
Are we going to the point where having both strong and weak ties, would that be the most effective, or am I jumping way ahead with that?
No, this is exactly what our findings are suggesting. So it's not either or, but it's more of and, right? But from a science, from a theoretical perspective, our next frontier would be to unpack what is this mechanism by which tie strength has an effect. It can't be information, because that effect is already being captured. It has to be something else. So I have a few ideas, but let's look at the boundary conditions, shall we?
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, please.
It's a little bit related to that question, maybe, but and again, more of a methodological question around meta-analysis.
Yeah.
But you pointed it out, which is that talking about tie strength has been a mess. There's no consensus around the way to measure it or what to think about it. Given that all of that messiness enters into your ultimate analysis, what do we make of it? Because averaging frequency, for instance, makes no sense. Because if the final story is right, that some balancing, then an average isn't telling us any story. In fact, we want this bimodal distribution of a bunch of weak and a bunch of strong, and averaging them together makes us look very different than, in fact, what is optimal. So how do we make sense, or how do we reconcile your very strong findings here with the fact that we know the underlying data is a mess?
Matt, that's a tough question. No, we sort of anticipated this.
Okay.
Because with Kilduff, I was trained more as a structuralist. So for me, I was looking at the pattern, the architecture of ties. And when I started doing this meta-analysis, very quickly I realized, even when you think about the 4 dimensions that Granovetter talks about, emotional intensity, people don't talk about it. Communication frequency is the one that most people measure. It's the easiest one. Then you talk about reciprocity, which surprisingly is available in whole network data, right? But very rarely is it used as a measure of tie strength. And then you're back to tie duration, which actually that's the one. So communication frequency and tie duration are the ones that most people use. And here
But even then, it depends on the way it ultimately gets measured, whether it's an averaging or some, frequency distribution, and then a metric on that or a statistic on that, or so I'm sympathetic.
No,
to
we
the
actually
exercise.
we actually did a t-test on the type of measure.
Okay.
But I thought I had put it up. Let me take a look. Oh, so this was where we had the dyadic versus the individual averaging. We didn't find a difference there. And I remember we looked at communication frequency and other measures, like communication frequency and others.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a difference. The one thing that I didn't report here was network size. Actually, network size, bigger networks actually do predict greater career success, which is in line with Kirdov's org science that's coming out. So larger networks are associated. Yes.
That was going to be my question, is like, how do you decide if someone is a weak tie or a strong person, if it was just like number of ties or if it was relative number of ties?
No, typically they would, so.
Sorry, it's a really basic question.
No, but it's a valid question, but when you're doing a meta-analysis, that is a decision you don't have to make. Because you are looking at that correlation table, and they're saying number of weak ties and, let's say, performance. So you are extracting that bit of information.
Okay.
So you're literally, the primary authors are the ones who are making a decision about those type of issues.
Well, thank you. Very sweet.
Okay. You'll have to just go through it once to figure it out. It's a little bit funky till you do it once, and then it falls in place.
So I want to go back to that point you made about the network size.
Yes.
Just basically like their degree centrality. Can you infer that if you have a larger degree of centrality, that you're going to as a result of that, going to have more weak ties because you can't maintain so many strong ties?
I can't. That statement I can't make because, again, this is the limitation of meta-analysis. I can agree with you that I can't go about spending time networking with everybody, having reciprocity, but from this data I cannot infer that. Again, meta-analysis, you're sort of bracketed by the data that you get. Like, for example, ideally, in this meta-analysis, I would want to include network size as a control variable. Okay? I can't. The closest I will show you.
Was it because they didn't collect data for network size?
They would only report it as a statistic in the sample description. The average network size was 7.
Oh.
But they didn't tell you network size, the correlation between network size and tie strength. If we included that, then that would be easy to do. Right. Okay? Ned, is this making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so where were we? Okay, we're back to the moderator, the national context. And basically what we're finding is that in China, first let's say Pakistan versus US, strong ties would be more potent in Pakistan than in US. Strong ties would be more potent in China versus, let us say, the US. And strong ties would be more potent in Korea versus the US. So basically in tight cultures, strong ties are more effective in delivering outcomes. So this internal versus external, this was where Granovetter was sort of, he sort of said maybe weak tie theory doesn't work in organizations, and he was right, because if you look at the effect size inside organizations, it's 0.16. That is, from weak ties to strong ties, the benefits go up. And the correlation between tie strength and career success is 0.16 inside organizations. Now this is the second part is the one where I'm still debating, because this basically debunks Granovetter's view. Because even in the external labor markets, tie strength, it was not weak ties. I was expecting a negative effect size. And when you look at this is saying even in external labor markets, strong ties are more beneficial. And so we don't want to piss Granovetter off. So I'll leave it to Kilduff on how to handle this one finding. But we are, this is completely in the strong tie camp, and we were neutral to this. We did not take sides on this. We just allowed the data to talk. Here is the one part, again, job status, managers versus low-end employees. And our argument was that strong ties are more beneficial to managers, and that's the case. Strong ties are less valuable to low-end employees, then that's the case. And it's reasonably significant. And so what we did was, so those of you who know Meta-SEM, so this is what we do. We did several meta-analyses. So for example, we looked at 54 studies, and then we looked at tie strength and informational effectiveness. So the effect size was 0.22. We created the correlation table, and we then imported this in a meta-analytic SEM package, and that's how you run it. So use this correlation table to run the path analysis. Now, as I said, network size, we don't have a direct measure of. But brokerage at the ego network level is correlated with network size, at least effective size. So if you control for it, here is what we do know. We recognize that tie strength still has a negative effect on career, and then it has the same effects on trust, informational effectiveness, attitudes to career success. And here is what Ron Burt, I don't know how Burt would react to this, but we actually found that brokers are less prone to trusting are less prone to be trusted, and that's, and we also found that brokers from an ego network approach are more prone to trust. So I'm not sure how to interpret these two conflicting findings, but we also found that brokers are less happy, and we also found that brokers are have less access to information benefits, which again actually was Ron Burt's one of his key ideas.
So brokerage, what is the difference in the calculation between brokerage network and brokerage ego?
Betweenness versus constraint.
Okay. So in the first case, you're only looking at your immediate neighbors. In the ego case,
Correct.
you're only looking at immediate
Correct.
neighbors.
Yeah.
And the other one is your betweenness in the entire network.
Correct. Now, our goal is not to present this part of the result, but we're still debating about it, because partly these model fit issues are coming up with the Meta-SEM, so we may have a version of this. But I was a little bit surprised with these negative effects, because it does go. I'm not surprised that brokers are not trusted. Okay, that's. Would you agree with that, Ned?
I would agree with that, yes.
Yeah. But I would not. It would be counterintuitive to think that brokers would have less informational advantage. That's not. That's one of the key mechanisms.
But you said the network is betweenness,
Yeah.
and the ego is constraint.
Correct.
Okay. So why are you worried about pissing off Ron?
So because what we are finding is that brokers have less informational advantage.
But that's for betweenness.
But that's for betweenness.
Yeah.
Ron is more committed to constraint than betweenness.
Yeah. Ron says
Ron is a
first order
constraint
ties
person.
are the only things
Yeah.
that matter.
All right.
Freeman is more betweenness.
Yeah.
Constraint is Ron's. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, that confirms Ron. Yeah. So anyway, so that's where we are with this.
But in fact, in that case, it's also positively related to trust.
Yeah, brokers are trusted more in the immediate vicinity.
Yeah. I think you should just drop the brokerage network one, and just keep the brokerage. Because that is, brokerage is, in my reading, it's more closely associated with the ego network.
So you're more about local brokerage than second order global brokerage. So you're citing Ron on this.
Maybe that's how I associate the word brokerage is more with the kind of work that Ron does. That's why I'm saying
This
that. Yeah.
brokerage actually is kind of a betweenness centralization.
Centrality.
No, centrality.
So it's measured at network level or
No,
individual?
individual.
Node level.
Okay.
So he takes each actor's
Mhm.
betweenness centrality and correlates it to the extent to which that actor was trusted.
Okay.
And that's the
That's the
Right.
ego version.
that,
No.
no.
The whole
That's the network. Both of these are measured at the actor level.
So what are the other ones?
It's measured at ego network level, not global network.
No. What we talked about was slightly different. So, when Ron Burt originally talked about brokerage, and Ned, please correct me on this, but imagine Nosh is the primary person. We are all connected to him directly, and there are gaps between us. That's what we call as primary holes. But let's say we go out. We go to people who I'm connected to back in Buffalo that Ron may not, that Nosh may not know. Those structural holes between me and my folks in Buffalo may impact Nosh. Those structural holes are secondary, and so what Nosh is saying, the holes here matter more than the secondary holes outside for him.
I'm just saying that's what I've heard more associated with the label brokerage.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really saying. I'm not saying the other things don't matter,
Yeah.
but I think most people that I have read use brokerage in the
I think his
First order.
2007 paper he would have
Yeah.
with
yeah.
local brokers. Okay. So why did we find? Sorry.
Do you-
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just fascinated by that negative coefficient though on the betweenness. I
Yeah.
might have chose it, or I might have expected it on
Positive.
on brokerage ego potentially. Although I think you'd have some reverse causality. It's easier for a trusted person to become a broker. But so why? You've looked at that coefficient far longer than we have. So
Actually,
what's your
I'm not
sense?
even convinced with that because we have a different meta-analysis on brokers and outcomes, which has been in the back shelf for the last 4 or 5 years. And what we do find, but remember, what we have controlled in this model is also tie strength. So the beauty of the Meta-SEM is you're able to take all these different variables into account and take out any correlations or covariances that can occur. So you're controlling for both tie strength. If you just, let's say this was not a paper about tie strength, and this was a paper on brokerage, right? And so what we are finding is that betweenness centrality leads to lower informational effectiveness. And that is of minus 0.08. Maybe it's not actionable information. And, even Krackhart at one stage says that even if you're a broker, you need to have cognitive accuracy, but he doesn't find for it. He doesn't find it. So how do brokers really get things done, right? And it's not through trust, and it's not through informational effectiveness. Maybe it's through control, which is the other mechanism. Maybe it's by developing routines and absorptive capacity routines that help them achieve it, which I have not measured.
What are the ways in which informational effectiveness has been typically measured in these?
Unique information, useful information, diverse information, coming up with creative ideas. Yes.
Your questions are usually less helpful, but in your measures of strength, I've always in my own life, I know I have strong ties that I consider strong ties, and I have strong ties that are strong because they're directly connected with my ability to stay alive. And my roommates, I don't like them, but I live with them. Sorry, that was an overshare. But I live with them. If I lose that relationship, I'll lose my shelter. So that's I effectively don't think of it as a strong tie, but it is. So is there a measure of strength that has to do with? Is that control that you're talking about? How directly it affects your basic needs?
No, I don't think Granovetter looked at it from that angle. Granovetter basically, yeah. I mean, I think it was less existential from that perspective.
But do you see what I'm saying? Is it any? I don't know. Is there any use in looking at it that way?
Oh, absolutely. There were studies done on networks in the 1950s, and some of my favorite studies, basically asked a commander crew. They were going for a survival exercise in Colorado, and they were put out on the survival, stretch for like 30 miles, and they had to trek this. And at the end of that survival exercise, they asked each and every member of that commander crew who would they like to fight with. I mean, fight on the side of. Who would, if they're going for a hunting expedition, who would they want? Okay, so they measured that tie, and they counted the number of times a leader was nominated on that tie. They then correlated that with combat effectiveness. And they also found who are the people you don't like. And again, they correlated, they said, how much was the leader seen as a jerk? Right? And they correlated that with combat effectiveness when they went out in the Korean War, I believe. And guess what? If you want this person to be beside you, that person really did well in war. You hated your leader, his plane crashed pretty soon. So the question you're asking is a pretty valid one. Only thing is, organizational research is less exciting.
Okay.
We ask more mundane stuff. Like, how frequently do you communicate? All right?
Question about the network and ego brokerage.
Yes.
So do you have a correlation of the two? I'm thinking about, because the two are
You can look at it here. 6 and 7 is 0.47.
yeah, it's not very small. So can we explain the result as like that? So the ego brokerage is kind of a local brokerage,
Yeah.
and network brokerage is next level, marginal,
Yeah.
further away. By including the both together, basically you are controlling each other. So if you go back to the results, if you take the sum of the two, so you can see in general brokerage is positive to everything. But the main effect is the majority effect size is from the local brokerage. And the marginal or long range brokerage is negative. It's not that effective if you control for the local brokerage.
I think.
And then to test that, if you remove the brokerage ego,
Then the brokerage
level
network
should
would
be
become positive.
Everything should be positive.
That's a good idea.
Fantastic. I can do that.
That is sort of what I thought you might have implied earlier, Prasad, when you said that putting both of them in might be resulting in some sort of, not over-identification is not the right word, but something along the you put too many variables in here, especially given the correlation between ego and network brokerage, right?
Yeah, no, this part is the one where I really have to sort of clarify some of the issues from a methodological standpoint.
Other questions? Go ahead.
So go ahead.
I'm not sure if my question is correct or
Go
not.
for it, go for it.
Also, I can speak English very well.
That's okay.
I want to ask you, for example, you study Pakistan or US and China. I live in Iran, and I understand that in the United States you have more opportunity to develop your network to gain with more weak ties. For example, when you work in a lab, a lot of speakers come and you have the opportunity to meet with a lot of people. But for example, in Iran, in your university, you just see the people who are in the lab or in your company or other places. And so maybe weak ties still works in these countries. But the people don't have the opportunity to make more weak ties. I mean, you understand?
So let me repeat what you're telling me so I understand your question. So that in certain contexts, people are forced to work and therefore get strong ties, and the opportunities to develop weak ties are fewer?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that's one way definitely to think about it. But another way to think about it is, let's say you're working in that lab, right?
Yes.
And then you move on to another lab, or you move to a different city. You are not interacting with those people that frequently anymore. So by default, those strong ties then become weak ties. So you would actually expect that, and this is where there's the Dunbar. Have you guys heard of the Dunbar number?
Mm-hmm.
He's a British guy, right?
He's at Cambridge.
Yeah. So the Dunbar number saying that
He
we have
was
around-
Gildaf's colleague at Cambridge.
Is it? Okay.
He was when
He was,
Gildaf.
yeah, all right. So 150 is the typical number of relationships at a moment of time that we have, the number of ties that we have. So I would suspect that even though there may be constraints to our networking behavior, but if you look at it from a larger perspective, I don't know I would say it'll even out.
But if you're measuring it intra-organizationally, wouldn't those people at the prior position not matter in the next measure?
That's an empirical question, and for that you need to read Sandy Pentland's paper in Science, because literally that's what he shows, that when you create a team at time 1 and then you create a team at time 2 recombining other people, there still remains an effect from the ties from time 1, if I've interpreted it correctly.
Yeah, no, that's right. So it was the 3 were trust, information, effectiveness, and what?
Job attitude.
And job attitudes, right? Which is the one that is the least interesting from a network's point of view. But
Yeah.
is that right? Yeah. But also, was the effect sizes, are they standardized? Because those coefficients were the smallest, right?
Yes, they are standard. They are, yeah. That's an interesting comment, Nash. Because for management researchers, this is the one. A happy worker is a productive worker. So even though it's 0.10, we still value it, especially from turnover and things like that. So anyway, so just to sort of look at this, one possible explanation for this negative effect is maybe reputation. So I may have all these weak ties, and people begin to trust me. May not trust me, they just rate me high. And therefore I get more opportunities to do things. And so maybe you want to cast your net as wide. You don't have to invest that many in developing strong ties with each of them. Cast your net as wide as possible, and that reputation sort of spreads. And or maybe when I'm interacting with all these weak ties of mine, I begin to understand who's connected to who, and that cognitive accuracy then helps me maneuver the landscape and sort of get ahead. So
I had a question about this. So going back to the sort of stuff that, did I interrupt you?
No, please.
So going back to the kind of argument that Yun was making, if I recall correctly, you showed a model where it was tie string to career effectiveness was 0, is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
So could it be that now that you got all these positive things, you have a residual negative left? Could that be? I don't know if that, because, do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
That you got, I'm just trying to figure out how to think of that.
So you're saying that's sort of capturing all the leftover variants?
Right.
Something along those lines. I'm not sure, I'm not articulating it very well, but the bottom line is, so in the previous case we said that if you took away the brokerage ego, then the brokerage network would become positive.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So in this case you're saying that if you take away everything else, this becomes 0. Right? This has become pretty close to 0 right now.
Yeah.
When you put in all those mediating things that show you that there's a positive tie strength that's positively associated with your big 3, and then that leads to career success, does that create a scenario? Does that create then a situation where what is the negative is what is left? I'm not sure whether is left over or is it like a residual.
One way to explain that is you have 2 populations. One is a strong type person, another is a weak type person. So this model captures both, and the effect cancelled out. And then in your second model, you don't have the direct path, and then that model captures only strong type person, and because there's no path to capture the weak type person. Your third model with the direct link captured both, and the strong type person is captured by the lower part of the model, and weak type person is captured.
So then that goes back to a moderating argument, except that it's an invisible moderating variable.
Yeah, but I think, I would have agreed with you if we were analyzing individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are not analyzing individuals. We are analyzing.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right.
We are from an analytical standpoint.
Right.
We are just analyzing the correlations.
Right. And then to extend that, there's an analogy. So basically, the argument could be the strong tie and weak tie is not the same as tie strengths. The analogy could be like trust, distrust. So the trust and the distrust is not trustless. Another analogy is hate and love. So hate is not love less.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I don't know whether it's possible or not. You can test the same model, but not using tie strengths, but using the amount of weak ties and the amount of strong ties. So separate the one variable into two parts. So the argument will be the strong tie and weak tie, they are different things. And there could be a person with many strong ties and with many weak ties.
You're going back to a very important debate. It goes back to Hertzberg talking about, if you are low on job satisfaction, does it mean you're dissatisfied?
Right.
And so the entire idea is satisfaction and dissatisfaction are two independent constructs.
Right.
And what you're saying is maybe weak tie and strong tie are two independent constructs, and they actually are not two ends of a continuum.
Right. I think it shows in the original figure, like weak ties are usually cross cliques, cross communities, and strong ties are usually within like a cluster. So if you think about small world situation, that could be the way to support those are different.
I mean, these are some of the things I can definitely test. Okay, so let me just, and maybe what I'm hoping through is to sort of establish, I mean, we're going back, we're still fine-tuning these results, especially the external labor market, to sort of see whether, weak ties matter. One of the things with meta-analysis is the role of outliers. Statistical outliers can really create havoc. For example, all the networks that we have looked here are informal ties. What we do not have in this study are 8 studies that used authorship networks. Because when you include authorship networks, people may not have interacted with each other, and then the samples are so huge. The average sample size is around 250 here. So there are 250 respondents in that survey. Once you bring in these huge author networks, patent network data, you're suddenly talking about in tens and thousands of data, and so they completely skew the entire result. So we just stuck to the boundary condition for our meta-analysis are informal ties, not authorship type of scenarios. Okay, and so future work, in addition to unpacking the mediating mechanism, we didn't have any papers that looked at the different media ties through different medium communication, channels of communication. And so those are some of the areas where I think this research would sort of tell you that we may have to do a little more work to sort of understand things. Okay. Well, yeah, go for it.
Just quickly, is there any research on, as you mentioned, the reactivating old ties? We talk about in one of our courses, reactivating a dormant tie. But is there any study as ties change? Some weak ties can become stronger, and strong ties can become weak, or they can become a positive relationship. It's strong, but it's negative, like the roommate example. Good example. We use it positive, but they have a falling out. This tie is very strong, but it's a negative experience. So I'm questioning, as those ties change, is that the next generation of research, or?
Nash, I'll leave the network dynamics part to you, Nash.
No, I think the question you're asking is that whichever class told you about dormant networks may have also used the word pruning your network.
Right. I remember that class.
So
I wonder which one.
that may be part of what is important is the skill of not only having strong ties and weak ties, but being able to know when to fold a strong tie into a weak tie, and being able the ability to take a weak tie and reactivate quickly to being a strong tie, etc. That's a skill set that goes. It's a second order skill set, network skill set beyond just having strong and weak, but being able to know how to tune them in and out.
And
I don't think there's anyone else. I haven't seen any studies on that. I don't know.
It's all brand new to me, so it's.
That idea is brand new to me too. It's the first time I'm sort of articulating.
having, but for example, if you look at Schulte's paper in Org Science.
Mm.
So in Siena, there is one rate of tie formation, right?
And there is also a separate parameter for tie dissolution.
Yeah.
Right. The endowment function is what
Yeah.
they call it there.
So
If you want to split it, you can do that.
so there are ways to get at that, Naveen, statistically.
Yeah.
But I don't think many people focus on those parameters as a of theoretical interest.
Right. It's difficult to get. I think now we're beginning to see things like in Twitter you can get unfriending data. In the real, right? There's people when they unfollow someone, not unfollow, you can get that data. And we did a paper on that, looking at predicting unfollow ties in Twitter. But there is, it's difficult to get dissolution tie data in the past. That has been. How do you get that data? It's not easy to switch it off. When you unfriend someone in Facebook, that's easier to do now than there was no switch in the offline world to unfriend people that you can log.
Right.
That becomes a challenge. The one area where they did study that is somewhat of a coincidence, but on interlocking board of directorates, they've seen when a link is dropped between two corporations, i.e., when is it that one company's employee stops being on the board of directors of another company. And the articles that I've seen on that are actually not very illuminating, because the majority of them are when someone dies, and then they don't replace that person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not like Google CEO.
Not like the Google and Apple situation that happened.
But that's the interesting one, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because of the conflict of interest. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've gone way over time here, but this is all very good. We had a great discussion, and let's join and give a round of applause.